Welcome everybody to the PFF College Football Podcast. I'm your host Seth Galina, PFF_Seth on Twitter. Big episode today. Had on Jac Collinsworth to talk about Clemson going to South Bend to take on Notre Dame. Jac will be there hosting that game for NBC Sports Saturday night. Huge game, national title, just ACC title chances and then national title chances all wrapped up to that game. And then I had on Steven Godfrey from the Banner Society, one of the best, if not the best, like college football journalist, whatever you want to call him, college football person out there. Tremendous knowledge of what is going on in college football. Loved having him on. We talked about, basically like the whole conversation was like program health. So we looked at a whole bunch of teams, whether it was Minnesota, Georgia Tech, Mississippi State, where are these programs right now in 2020, and what's the outlook for them? Just tremendous conversation. Steven is a knower of all things college football, so look forward to that. And then we did not talk to Anthony Tresh this week, previewing each game, but you can find us Friday afternoon, I think at 2:00 Eastern. You can go on Twitter, and then we do a live stream where we break down each game for this weekend. So you can find us there doing that on Friday, but not this week on the podcast. Next week you will have us doing that. So anyways, here's me and Jac talking about Notre Dame Clemson. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by Jac Collinsworth, who is the host of Notre Dame Football on NBC, here to talk about the biggest game in college football this weekend. Clemson going to South Bend to take on the Fighting Irish. Huge game. Clemson coming into town without Trevor Lawrence, of course. Notre Dame has a great defense. What have you seen so far from Clemson with DJ in there that makes you think that they will or they will not score a lot of points on this Notre Dame defense?
Off the bat, DJ Uiagalelei. DJ Uiagalelei is the way that we're going to say it. We better get used to learning his name.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like I flipped on the tape today. I'm going, this is great. For Notre Dame fans, they probably think they have a great chance. No Trevor Lawrence. This is their best opportunity to go win one of these big game hurdles that has been the nightmare of the entire Brian Kelly era. Can they win the big game, the prime time, premier, 1 versus 4, 1 versus 3, whatever it is, that game? Can they go get, the elites of college football? And then you go watch Uiagalelei and realize he's a star too. This guy has a huge arm. He's 6'5", about 240, 250 pounds, and he runs like Cam Newton. He's like a smooth open field runner that's faster than you think, and I wouldn't want to bring him down. I don't think in any way it's like some great advantage. I think they have another star stepping in at quarterback. We've seen Dabo Swinney have plenty of success with young quarterbacks, i.e. Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's still Clemson. It's not like he's playing by himself out there. Like the receiver position is not as kind of what it has been the past every season for the past 5 years or whatever, but he's got Travis next to him, and the O-line's pretty good. And like you said, I mean, he's big and he's thick and he throws the ball with such velocity. The accuracy was so against Boston College on a lot of throws, but at the same time, like the physical tools are absolutely insane. Now, my question is, so Boston College presents a very different defense than Notre Dame did. Boston College is very static. They're going to show you what they're going to play. They're going to run it, and they're going to ask you to beat them. Jeff Hafley coming from that Ohio State tree.
Right.
Notre Dame, they're fun. They do stuff. First of all, they're talented as hell. D-line, linebacker, secondary, and a guy like Kyle Hamilton, he is all over the place. I saw him do some weird stuff where he's starting one way, he's coming across the field. Can Notre Dame do that type of deception, that type of disguise to kind of slow down at least Clemson in the passing game, because you do have an 18-year-old quarterback there?
They're going to have to.
Yeah.
They're going to have to. And I think the two most interesting pieces are Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. How do they use him? Because Travis Etienne is no longer a great running back in terms of great ground game running back that can also have a little bit of receiving. He's now become a great receiving running back that has an awesome ground game too. Like when he decided to go back to Clemson, he got a second round grade, and he said to himself, if I'm going to be a first round running back, I got to be Kamara. I got to be Aaron Jones. I have to have that element of my game where I am terrific in the passing game. I mean, you go back and watch the BC tape. I mean, they're using him deep routes down the field, lining him up at receiver, running stop and goes. And he has a natural sense for route running stuff too. So the biggest question that I have is, do you go with Kyle Hamilton on ETN? Do you go with the Owusu Koromoa on ETN? Because I don't know who else matches up with him. I don't think that you want Drew White on him at any point in the game. I don't think that athletically he'll match up well. I'll give you a name that's just been lingering in the back of my mind, though. Marist Liufau. Marist Liufau is a sophomore, and he's young, that Clark Lee loves. And one of the best things he does is runs in open space. It just can athletically hang with just about anybody. He may be somebody that they try to match up in the open field in the receiving game on ETN.
All right, switching over to the other side of the field, you have, the Notre Dame offense led by Ian Book. It's been an up and down career, not even just this season. It's been an up and down career for Ian Book. When you watch Phil Jurkovec play against Clemson last week, and this guy could have been the quarterback for Notre Dame this year, and he goes over to Clemson. It looks good on paper, but there's a lot of plays under pressure. He's getting hit and he throws up and credit to the Boston College receivers. They made plays one-on-one against man coverage from Clemson. I don't know if that's in Ian Book's game to throw down the field and give his receivers one-on-one chances. He wants to take crossing routes. He wants to take underneath stuff. But you kind of got to get some plays against Clemson's defense. You got to get some chunks. Do you see them getting those chunks, or it's going to be a slow matriculation, with that O-line, with that ground game to beat Clemson?
The biggest question's always been, okay, yes, they can run the ball all over the ACC. Teams that they're a little bit bigger than, teams that they're a little bit more athletic than. But then when you meet Clemson, when you meet Georgia, when you meet Alabama, can you run and hammer the ball on them? Can you move them off the line of scrimmage? And historically, the answer has been no. This is a different group. This is a different looking Notre Dame offensive line. And by the same token, it's a different looking Clemson defensive line. They're young. They're young as hell. And they have some young talent that absolutely looks dominant to me. I think they're going to be awesome for 5 years to come, but they're young. If you ask me who has the advantage right now, is it Miles Murphy or is it the Notre Dame offensive line? I'm still edging out the Notre Dame offensive line. Now, they have to prove me right in that. Yeah. I mean, these are 5-star, number one recruit in the class kind of guys. Brian Bruzzi, too. I know that's a different pronunciation. Brian Bruzzi is another one that's he looks like he's been there for 10 years. He looks like an NFL defensive lineman already. He has the massive size. But he's an athlete. He's like a dancing bear. He throws you back to like Warren Sapp or something. He's too athletic to be that big. That's the question coming into it. Can they move a young defensive line of Clemson? If the answer to that's yes, they will be hammering the ball all game. It'll be the two tight ends, Tommy Tremble. They'll be getting the ball to Michael Mayer. They'll be running Kyron. They'll be running Chris Tyree. That will be the game plan. Because they're weak at receiver right now. I mean, they're missing Braden Lindsey. That's their deep threat guy. And so that makes it tough on pushing the ball down the field.
Yeah, I think that's the story of the game. Like you said, they haven't been able to push Clemson around. And I might be talking into my butt here, but I believe Tyler Davis, Xavier Thomas might not be playing. We've heard
Tyler Davis.
this. So
he might not be playing.
Yeah. So that is huge for Notre Dame. But like you said, the nice thing is you have, your job is to learn the pronunciations of these people's names. I just treat them all like they're one name celebrities, like Sinbad or Madonna or something like that. Yeah. So I just say DJ and Brian, and then we're good, and everyone knows who we're talking about. Anyways, this is great to talk to you. Where can the people find you online, and then where can they see you on Saturday?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of digital stuff these days. So Peacock, we do a show every Monday with Rodney Harrison, Safety Blitz, which has actually turned into a really fun part of the week. One of my favorite parts of the week doing that. Also on NBC Sports, YouTube, all those things. And then this Saturday, It'll be all day long. Breeders' Cup feeds straight into Notre Dame football, and then you have Sunday Night Football, Brady Breeze back to back to back. So it's a huge weekend for NBC, and you can feel it. Like I kind of live for those big weeks where it's like everybody's kind of on their P's and Q's, and you feel that right now. So it's just been, I'm fired up, man. I'm ready to get up to South Bend and get this thing cranked up.
I'm excited. I'm so excited to watch this game. Saturday night, right?
It is 7:30.
Saturday night. Oh my God, that's going to be crazy. All right, thanks for joining us, Jack, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me, man. Keep up the great work.
All first-time depositors at Monkey Knife Fight that put at least $20 into their account while using promo code PFF will receive a free PFF Edge annual subscription. So that's a $40 value for just $20. And you'll get that opportunity to turn that $20 into even more money playing daily fantasy football and prop games at one of the fastest growing fantasy sports sites in the USA in Monkey Knife Fight. Go to Monkey Knife Fight and deposit your $20 with promo code PFF today to receive your free PFF Edge annual subscription. PFF and Sunday Night Football's Jac Collinsworth is teaming up with one of the best players on and off the field, 49ers All-Pro cornerback Richard Sherman. The Jac Collinsworth podcast featuring Richard Sherman is available now wherever you find your podcast. They will provide the most interesting football conversation in sports every week. And sometimes that means the discussion will venture off the field too. Additionally, Chris will be taking a dive into the game of football as he sees it, inviting in the best and brightest to talk about everything that is happening in the great game of football. Mark your calendars. You do not want to miss the best 60 minutes of insight this season. MooseFit is a premium online workout program and remote coaching service that provides you with daily workouts based on your goals, the time you have available, and the equipment that you have at your disposal. Purchase your MooseFit membership and a MooseFit coach will reach out to you with a questionnaire. Based on the information provided in the questionnaire, your MooseFit coach will either assign a pre-made program to you or will create your custom program for you. No two programs are the same. MooseFit is well equipped to help provide you with daily workouts that will help you reach your health and fitness goals. For PFF listeners, use code PFF50 and receive 50% off your first month. For more information, check them out on Instagram at MooseFit or on their website, www.moosefit.com. I'm joined now by Steven Godfrey, who is a senior writer for Banner Society, talking college football. Steven, welcome to the PFF College Football Podcast.
This is great. I'm excited because so far we've been talking about Quebecian lineage and hockey before we started. So let's talk some college football.
No. We're sticking with hockey. We're doing hockey for 45 minutes, and we're going to turn everyone off of this podcast. But I want to get into this because me and you are kind of mortal enemies. I don't know if you know this. So you are a Atlanta Falcons fan. I'm a New Orleans Saints fan. Already, that's I shouldn't even have you on the podcast.
Diametrically opposed. Mortal enemies.
Diametrically opposed. We can even add. So I'm an LSU fan. I didn't go to LSU. You went to Ole Miss, even though you wouldn't call yourself like a fan of Ole Miss, but that's something.
I will say this. I'm not trying to kill the bit. I know I married into an LSU family. Way better tailgating. Probably should have gone to college there, except I'd be dead.
Right. Okay. Well, so glad you didn't go to college, so we can have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I do like LSU people a lot.
And then this is a stretch of maybe. You are an Atlanta Braves fan.
I am.
Who used to play in the same division as the Montreal Expos, which I am, I guess, still a fan of the Montreal Expos, even though
you have to be.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of the Habitants?
Yes. So I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan. And I have not been a Montreal Canadiens fan since they traded my favorite player, PK Subban, to your favorite team, the Nashville Predators.
We gave you Shea Weber.
And who's been good. He's actually been very good.
Yeah.
But every time I see him, he reminds me that PK Subban does not play for my favorite team anymore. And
he doesn't play for mine either. I mean,
that's true.
I mean, we screwed it up too. If it makes you feel any better.
It does not make me feel any better. So thanks. All right, let's get into college football before we alienate the entire.
Warm and fuzzy. That's brilliant.
I wanted to get your opinion on some kind of health of the program type situations with some of the schools who have either been up or down this season. I want to start with Georgia Tech. I liked what I saw early in the season. Obviously, they get the upset of Florida State early. Then it's kind of been back to reality. But is Jac Collins building something there that can be relatively sustainable in at least the ACC?
I'll start with a confession, because when I do these things on podcasts, it actually kind of holds my feet to the fire. When Banner Society was launched, 14 months ago, which feels approximately like 9 years, I started a profile of Collins that has been ongoing. And I was out for a little while with a kid, and our company had furloughs, and like a bunch of things have happened. And so Georgia Tech is fascinating to me. I actually keep the files from my interviews with Jac Collins on my desktop, specifically as an albatross. This is a weird writer trick where it reminds you have to do this, like you have to complete this thing. So they are one of, if not the most interesting program in Power 5 to me, because I'm trying to figure out, without passing referendum on Collins personally, whether or not this system is going to work. And I think potentially change a lot that needs to be changed in college football. And so what he's embarked on, and we can kind of pick all this apart, because there's so much from scheme development to recruiting to like giving athletes a little bit of agency at the collegiate level. He is, I think, and I say I think because national college football writers, we fall into a trap every time a young, like hot, dynamic coach gets hired somewhere. We all like rush all over, like we fall all over ourselves to write the same, like he's changing everything profile. So I've because I'm a bit of a psychopath, adopted a very long view of looking at this, whether or not this is going to work in Atlanta, because it's a really hard, it's a harder program to be successful at than I think people realize at first glance. And he is right now, I think, actually following through on what he says and implementing like some pretty systemic changes. And also they're getting rid of they're transitioning out of the triple, and they play teams like Clemson every year. So like the trajectory is just, you have to be patient.
No, last year they were as bad of an offense as you can be in college football. And even just a year later, obviously it helps having, getting, I think Jeff Sims is a 4-star quarterback. That obviously helps, even though he hasn't been like amazing. It's something, because I think they went through a bunch of quarterbacks. They were using like wildcat quarterbacks for whole games. I think a corner or a safety play quarterback for them last year. So at least there's some stability there, even if it's not like elite level.
Yeah, they had to run some option at certain points. I think it was mainly because of the run blocking.
Awful. One of the worst offensive linemen that we've seen in the PFF college era.
So like, obviously my role is kind of I'm on a podcast with Richard Johnson, who kind of speaks y'all's language, and like, I'm not a schematics guy. And I often embed with teams, and I basically walk into like an O-line meeting, for instance. And my job is to walk into like a 500 level foreign language class for a language I don't speak, and then try and decipher it for the common fan. And that's kind of the mission statement for me. However, I will say this. I was at Tech during spring ball the previous cycle, and then last fall was the last time I was there. Obviously with COVID, I haven't been in person since. And like when I go to practices, whether like I'm with other media or I'm actually just allowed privately to go to practice, which sometimes happens.
Yeah.
I never act like, I never stand there and I'm like, God, it's amazing footwork by the DB, because like my job is not to act like I know something I don't. My job is to try and create narrative and tell stories and hopefully explain things, often using the words of people who do know about the footwork of a nickelback. So there is I walked into Tech. This is a really long-winded story, but I walked into Tech the first time, and I was just standing there during like a morning scrimmage, and I don't know if I can swear on this or not, but
I don't even know if I can swear on this, so go ahead.
I mean, literally, I stood there and we were like, "Holy shit, this is the worst I've never seen an offensive." And it's not lack of effort, and I mean, like I'm not saying that as in like it was a talent issue. I mean, obviously it kind of was, but I mean, he got Brent Key as a guy who was at Alabama, who's a Tech alumnus. And I would just imagine, based on from what I've gleaned, is that he basically went to Brent Key and was like, all right, so you've been on like national title winning teams and developed NFL talent at every offensive line position. And like now you are going to go like undergo the largest restoration project
incredible. Yeah.
In Power 5 in the modern era. And I always use the modern era. I'm not one of these people who like does like, this hasn't happened since 1948 because the sport is just like fundamentally different. So I like to use either 96 or 98, depending on your interpretation on, because I think that's when physical development changed. And that's also when money changed and how money was spent. And that trickles into football. So in the modern era, I don't know if I've seen of an offensive line project at the Power 5 level quite like this
one. And they've been like I said, they've been okay this year. Obviously they had that big win, but they've kind of just been okay. But I wanted to ask you about like recruiting in that area. Why is it still a thing where like these city schools just can't get players to come to their school? Is that something that I'm making up, or is this a real thing?
No, this is the kind of stuff I live to talk about, honestly, because it falls into every other bucket of, you know, what I think is good writing and good journalism and just honestly, like kind of the essence of the American experience, especially if you're young and Black and an athlete. There is everything from state funding issues to white flight in the 1960s to I think the way teams brand and market themselves, association with Black culture, all of that has either positively or negatively shaped the perception of quote unquote city schools. If you look at, I'll put it this way, if you look at where the line ends for the Power 5 and the Group of 5, it really, you're having a conversation about quote unquote city schools and which ones were able to kind of buff the edges of that perception. Like I think specifically it was Louisville that invested enough money to look a little bit more like a country club and present themselves as a little bit more modernized. And then something that's a little too urban in sort of the code speak, which is like Memphis and Cincinnati. I think like that's the line that you draw. And Houston, I would add. Houston is probably the biggest example there. Talent-wise, those teams that I just named, like Louisville, you know, who's a Power 5 school, or Pitt is a Power 5 school, really no different when coaches turn on film or they evaluate talent than Cincinnati or Houston or, you know, even USF or UCF, which is a little different in urban interpretation. In Atlanta, there's multiple things that are working against Collins or were, I don't know. We're going to find out. And working against Georgia Tech. And that was urban campus for a long time. Okay. Tech school with a really, really good academic reputation. And it's amazing that good academic reputations work against recruiting, but they do. And it was this total disconnect between a relationship with a campus and a culture that was in the actual heart of Atlanta. Like when you look at the map, if you go down where 75 and 85 meet at the junction, before you get to Mercedes-Benz or the old Georgia Dome, Tech is just a little bit north of that. It's in the heart of the city. You cannot miss seeing Tech if you drive through the heart of Atlanta. And yet it was a million miles away. I think running the Triple for as long as they did, and I have a very conflicted relationship with the Triple because I grew up a fan of Georgia Southern and I grew up kind of believing in it. And, you know, we were talking about partisanship before the show started. I actively cheer for Georgia Southern because that's the team I grew up with. And then I always want to see the academies do well. One, because I think it's a different sport entirely. And I think the dynamics are just amazing, but also like they run the Triple and I love the Triple.
Who doesn't?
However, all that being said, a Power 5 school in Atlanta, Georgia had absolutely no business running the Triple for as long as they did. I think it was a culture of rot. I think it was not a progressive culture in a football sense. I think it was inherently reductive. And I think that there was almost an anti-recruiting ethos around Georgia Tech at a time in which, if you look at things like migration patterns in the United States, state funding for education, and where discretionary income goes, football in America has become more and more concentrated in Atlanta and the state of Georgia in the last decade than anywhere else. And I'll take the Pepsi challenge on Texas and Florida and California. And the reason I say that is because so much money got put into coaching salaries at the high school level.
That's what I'd heard, yeah.
So much money got put into big public schools in the exurbs of Atlanta, much like it did in Houston in the 1980s in the various oil booms. It's the same thing. Atlanta's experienced a ridiculous amount of sustained growth. That's why it looks like, you know, a giant interstate spaghetti. But inside of that, what you get are a wonderful climate for people from all around the country to move and have an affordable suburban life. And honestly, in a lot of minority populations, that's an appeal that doesn't exist anywhere else. So That's why Houston is what it is. That's why Atlanta is what it is. That's the shortest way to describe it. So then you have Georgia Tech. It's just sitting there, and they're like kind of the nerd school, but they're also running the triple. So even if you're a big nerd and maybe you're from a warm weather climate, all of a sudden a Stanford is more appealing to you, even though you could get in some instances you can get a Stanford quality education at Georgia Tech. And so Collins saw all that. This is just based on my conversations with him. And he had an eye on that school, I think, from the very beginning. I met him when he was a DC at Mississippi State. And he had worked there. He had actually worked under George O'Leary. And he knew, he saw the untapped potential. But I'll be honest with you, there's still a ton of work to be done because they have to change the perception of that place. And right now, just in recruiting, I don't follow it day by day, but my best way of following recruiting is developing relationships with coaches and other individuals in the industry who are very honest with me. And Tech still has a lot of work to do, and they know that to change that perception. But look, I wrote a piece about this summer. You would always rather be in a place where things have fallen into disrepair, but your geography is good than the other way around.
Right. Okay.
Like, nobody wants to do the PJ Fleck thing at Minnesota. Honestly, they want to do the South Florida thing, which is like Jeff Scott comes in, everything's a damn mess, but eventually, slowly, he should be able to start picking off Tampa, St. Pete, go into the Panhandle, go into Orlando. Like coaches want to do that. They don't want to have to find a way to get a 3-star 2,000 miles across the country and come see their cold weather campus. They just don't.
Yeah. Well, Minnesota was actually one of the teams I wanted to talk about also in that. So, they have a great year last year with, they won, 10 games or over 10 games the first time in how many years. Look, it's early this year in the Big Ten. They're 0-2. They can't play defense worth a lick. But where are they as a program in terms of, is he going to you think he's going to stick around and see it through? Is what you said about that. I agree. That's the hardest thing in the world. And I went to Syracuse last year to watch a game, and it's the same thing. It's there's no one in that area to go and play high level football in a Power 5 conference. So why would Dino Babers stick around if he fixes anything? I mean, don't know if that's going to happen at Syracuse, but with Minnesota, it felt like he put it together. The offense worked, the defense worked last year. Now it might be completely a shambles. But is the health of the program good enough right now in Minnesota?
So what I always try and disabuse people of creating context from 2020. I think I actually at this point I just copy and paste it into everything I write this year because of obvious, bizarre, world-altering circumstances that we're dealing with, and it does trickle directly into college football. So that being said, they were some teams you say they're due for a regression because of maybe they played in the margins a little too well, maybe they were a little too lucky in turnover, maybe this, maybe that. This is a team that talent-wise, fundamentally, you saw they were going to regress.
Yeah.
This is something that you dealt with evaluating Purdue. This is something that you've dealt with in evaluating Syracuse. I think Syracuse is a great comp in a lot of ways because of what you said. It's really hard to keep the cupboard stocked year in and year out to that degree when you don't have the natural resources. It's why one of the most schizoid jobs that in college football is Hawaii. It's because you can't keep them on the island. You either got to keep them on the island, which is a rare few that you actually want that way, or you've actually got to get them on the island and keep them there. And I talked to Nick Rolovic about it last year when he was still the head coach. It's really astronomically hard. And so Minnesota, Syracuse, these programs are going to have to either fundamentally change what they do in a drastic manner. And I'm not joking or calling back when I say run the triple or just do something wildly different, or you have to expect regression. You have to expect almost systematic regression because, and I know if you're listening to this and you're a Minnesota fan, you're like, well, why not Wisconsin? Wisconsin has evened out their edges over the course of decades. Also, the style of ball that Wisconsin and Iowa play are inherently averse to peaking and valleying, right? The floor and the ceiling get a lot tighter in Iowa and in Wisconsin. And the reason why, as I've learned from coaches, is that you can develop linemen and tight ends, and then you can take, JUCO transfer wide receivers and system quarterbacks who have a lot of time and don't make a ton of really important or fast decisions, and just keep the thing going, plodding along, so to speak. That's the difference. PJ doesn't want to do that. I mean, PJ had his heart set on Oregon from every campfire story I've heard in every gossip circle. He didn't end up there. But I think what he has is the right way to approach Minnesota. And a lot of rival coaches in the Big Ten West have said that they don't really take it personally, but like his style of branding and recruiting, it really rubs a lot of people the wrong way, because like when you think of Big Ten West, you think of like the Ferentzes, and you think of Wisconsin, and you think of like this very sort of, I don't know, like inherently Midwestern culture, right? And he's upending a lot of that. And I think it rubs people the wrong way. But I think as far as his job stability goes, I think Minnesota knows they made a hire a little bit better than they probably should have. And they're willing to, especially in 2020, ride through a dip with him to see if there's a long-term play here.
But would you say that I don't want to get in his head or anything, but do you think he sticks it out? Do you think if a job opens, if like a Texas opens or something, like he would stick it out? Well, I mean, Texas is a wrong example. Yeah. I think he would jump ship to Texas, but like some other place, do you think I don't know if you know him personally, but like, do you think he would stick it out?
I think that from everything that I've heard kind of in the back channels and stuff is that he's in I wouldn't necessarily say a Matt Campbell or a Luke Fickell position. Like those two individuals to me are defined by literally two jobs. And everybody, like we talk about it all the time, and I've gotten tired of kind of like hinting at it. But like, in my opinion, Luke Fickell is not leaving Cincinnati and Matt Campbell is not leaving Iowa State for literally the jobs in Columbus or in South Bend, or something of that comp, because they both feel like I'm in a really good situation. You know, in Campbell's situation, he does have a path to the playoff, because regardless of the fact if it's Iowa State, you can still play your way into the playoff.
Absolutely.
And possibly, I just wrote about Cincinnati this week, but possibly Luke Fickell, maybe they're finally that mythical G5 team that breaks in this year, because they play real defense. That's what I was kind of stumping for this week. They play like P5 defense. I think in PJ's case, he knows that, I will say this, the Big Ten West is winnable right now. I don't know if they're not equipped to do it this year. Or they also lost their OC, I might add. They are not equipped to do it. What to me stands out in the future is he's got to look at a job and really kind of, and I think a lot of coaches are coming to grips with this, unless it is a true inarguable top 5 job, which is only going to give you a short leash. How much time could you get at Minnesota, and what are your relative expectations for your career? And what are your relative expectations for the job that you're currently at? Because if Minnesota were to win their division once in the next 3 or 4 years, he would be an unqualified success. Right? There's a quality of life aspect to that, especially if you can start building upon it in recruiting and feeling like, well, you know, at Minnesota, we're on the winnable side of the conference, right? The resources are there, and that I have a new stadium. If they commit to hiring good coaches, then we can try and go out and recruit. And then we know we can test our quality against elite, because we would ostensibly be playing Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State on the other side every year in Indianapolis. So I think all of that encourages him to take a really long look before jumping.
Okay, so something that it's always it bothers me about the sport that we both cover is like now it feels like there's like entrenched positions in terms of the haves and have-nots that maybe weren't there even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was. And so like I was on like Syracuse radio this off season, and the guy, the host was asking me, you know, what does Syracuse have to do to be like a player in the ACC? And my response was kind of just like, nothing. That's it. It's over. Like you missed the boat, the money boat, and it's like I don't know how you can go and recruit year to year, like you said before. So like my question is like, is that true? And is there any way that we can that we can kind of get some of these programs back down to earth with like, you know, Clemson with the rest of their conference, Ohio State with the rest of their conference, and so on and so forth?
I mean, it is case by case, certainly. And I know that we're never going to see a salary cap. We're never going to see that kind of leveling of the field. For all the NFL's faults, that is one thing that keeps me coming back is I think you are a judicious GM and 2 drafts away from being good, especially now the way the quarterbacks have changed. And at least that's what I'm telling myself right now as my NFL team is a smoking husk. But it's harder in college because if you're an ardent, fervent Syracuse fan, for instance, you have to figure out what is your definition of success. Because in reality, and I have this conversation with a lot of fan bases, in reality, you will never, ever, ever see a national championship win. You won't even see a playoff berth. You won't even see contention for those things as long as you're alive. You will be long dead.
Like,
that's hard.
But this was not the case. Even like if we just stick to Syracuse, were they not? I mean, I don't know my history that well, but like 1998 with McNabb, they were winning a whole bunch of games. Like so, like this kind of like I said, entrenched positions by some of these teams. This is a recent thing, right?
Yes, and so I assume what you're asking is why couldn't you upend the current circumstance and find something that's a little more like why couldn't you put yourself in a position to be a playoff team? And
or
you calcify.
Go ahead. Yeah, like well, I said the flip side is like and I don't think anyone really wants this. Is like, well, let's do a super conference. Let's do what they're going to do in Europe in soccer, and like let's put them all together because there's a gulf in each league, minus the SEC really. Like, so is that ever going to happen?
No, the answer to that is no, because you're never going to do anything for the sake of competitive balance because no one, no one in college football gives a shit about competitive balance, right? You're talking about serving particular financial masters, and as long as you do that, which college football does very well, there is absolutely no incentive to change any kind of power structure, right? The power right now is so pocketed in college football and so dispersed because there's no centralized governing authority that there is no one really in a position of power asking these questions, and no one cares. No one cares. Like, if programs live and die eternally to serve their larger conference masters, so Syracuse to a Clemson or a Florida State, historically, that is just the way that the system's supposed to work. I mean, this is not a sport that likes usurpers. We don't do that. Like, you don't have even baseball with no salary cap and wildly different payrolls. Occasionally you can see baseball celebrate the low budget team like a Tampa Bay going as far as they did. College, the base instinct when a program that quote unquote should not be contending starts contending is they're cheating. And that's a completely different mindset than any other sport, as far as I know, in the world. And I don't know how long that's going to carry on. I think people's attitudes towards that are changing, but it's very slow. So if you're Syracuse or if you are, Iowa State or NC State or one of the Mississippi schools or, Oregon State or Arizona. I mean, we can do this all day.
There's more of these teams than we can mention than the other teams.
Look, the reality is this, and I get my information, or I sort of base my beliefs on what people who are in power, in coaching and administration, in the industry, what they say privately, because that's when they're being the most honest. That's what I tend to parrot back, because most people believe there's only 20 jobs in America where you can compete for a national title right now. Now, those 20 change, but they don't change a lot, right? You're always going to be able to either fix up Ohio State and then go push it out, or you can jump right in like Ryan Day did. You can look at a problem so Florida has underperformed relative to the previous 20-ish years where you had 2 title regimes. You had the Spurrier era and the Meyer era, and then like McElwain and Mullen, that job has been like a notch down. However, on its merits alone, that's still a job that you could feasibly contend for a national title within 2 to 3 years. Okay. So there's a difference there. Then there's these transitional programs that I feel like flip in and out, and drawing that line that's where you really get into some angry folks on Twitter. Like, you have a Nebraska team that in our lifetime has gone to and won national championships, who no one I know at all in the industry right now, at all, anywhere, let me emphasize that, believes that Nebraska is a place where you can win a national title. It is not a thing anymore. The team that I kind of always draw in the same breath is Tennessee.
I've always been curious about those two teams specifically because of their recruiting base.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't know as much about like what they were doing there schematically in Tennessee and like the Fulmer era as we kind of know about the Nebraska, the 90s and the 80s and stuff. They were kind of, running the option, running the I-form option, stuff like that. But it's like, can you just go and get this? Like I guess maybe this, like how were they getting good enough players in that geographical location? And then B, why are they not getting those same players now?
Because they're really, really quickly, just as an example, kind of to everything that's going on. There are more college football programs than ever before, right? The team that I grew up cheering for was an FCS monster because they had played like around World War II, but then they weren't a program when my parents were in college. In Statesboro, Georgia, they figured out in the early 80s, gosh, there's a lot of high school football talent in this state, right? But there are two places to go to play, Georgia Tech and Georgia, and they can only sign so many kids. So what we're going to do, because we're just spitting distance from North Florida and we have all of this Georgia here, is we're going to suck up all these kids. We're going to find a system that we can run that essentially minimizes, again, that floor and ceiling situation, and we're going to road grade every team in 1AA. And for years, there were stories like this everywhere. Eastern Kentucky's another program. Well, what they did was they got all the partial qualifiers in Florida, and they were like, hey, you can't – the University of Florida's not going to give you a sniff, so come to Eastern Kentucky and win championships at this level. You had all of these pocket universes of we found a way to hack the system and we're really good. And then what happened was a lot of things happened. But what happened was that, one, recruiting became national. More and more programs started to step up. So if you were a Nebraska or you were a Tennessee, you were successful in a time in which not a lot of programs were on national television. And I'm not talking about the 60s so much as I even am like this goes into the early 90s. So if you're in a conference like the Big 8 / the Big 12 in your Nebraska, or you're in the SEC and you're Tennessee, you're going to get an outsized exposure relative to where you are. And both of those places aren't really like, if you go in 100 miles in any direction of those two campuses, like they ain't really growing defensive tackles on trees in any of those areas. Okay. But in the 90s, Nebraska, Tennessee, they're going into South Central Los Angeles. They're going into Miami-Dade.
That's crazy.
They're going into Atlanta. They're going into Cincinnati. They're going into, you name it, right? It's what Notre Dame did. It's what Notre Dame ostensibly still does. It's what Alabama does now. It's what
that's what it seems like. That's what all those top teams is doing. Like I know from like experience with LSU, it's like, oh, well, they're going into they were in for the DC quarterback. Like what? Spencer Ware's from like Ohio. Like that's weird.
LSU's a great example because what Ed did, and I know there's a ton. I mean, let's not even figure out LSU right now, but
okay.
Ed's approach was, we've rested on our laurels being a Louisiana school that recruits Louisiana. We should lock the gates, as they say in recruiting, and get the best 17, 18. But we have to leave ourselves space to be competitive on a national platform for quarterbacks, for 5-star defensive talent, for game-changing skill position guys at wide receiver. And that's what they started doing. So they started emphasizing places like Los Angeles, and they were inordinately in Baltimore, Washington.
It's crazy, yeah.
Crazy. But the reason they do that is twofold. They put billboards up every time somebody commits to LSU. Yep. And like there was one in Nashville because there was a kid here that committed as a defensive back a couple years ago. They go from being a Louisiana thing to being a national identity. It's why Oregon had this sort of blueprint that I believe, just to kind of get back to the original thought, the way Oregon did it, and Oregon basically did that, right? Where they're like, we're national. We're cool. We don't exist in the concept of a state, right? Yeah. We're cool. Yeah. We're modernized. We look more like a lifestyle brand or a television show than we do a college football program. And while we represent the state of Oregon, we are by no means defined by it. And and that kind of killed the Tennessees of the world and the Nebraskas of the world overnight, because Oregon was purposeful about its national branding, whereas Tennessee and Nebraska just assumed it. And I think the walls closed in on those programs. Meanwhile, all those little schools that I was talking about earlier, they started to move up. And so what happened was these kids that were getting ignored, and maybe they were going to play wide receiver at Minnesota and they grew up in Miami, Now maybe they're going to go to the University of South Florida or FAU or FIU or UCF or Georgia Southern or App State. You have in the actual, not the conference, but in the actual Sun Belt region in the United States, you have a proliferation of group of five and high-level FCS programs that keep more kids at home. And again, it's almost a reverse trickle down. It's a trickle up effect that hurts the Nebraskas of the world. It hurts Knoxville. And I think it really it killed a lot of Big Ten schools for a long time. And that's really why I don't think Meyer to Ohio State did it. I really think when Penn State hired Franklin, it set off a trend of we've got to get Southern minded about these kids that we used to just get lazily. And that's why really, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Braum is an SEC head coach. I know he doesn't have that pedigree necessarily, but that mentality now is commonplace in the Big Ten. And it really explains the Mel Tucker hire at Michigan State.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I got it now. So I wanted to ask you about Miami. So they have one loss this year, just to Clemson. I'm curious if you think that they can So look, Derek King has been great for them.
Yeah.
It's a one-year thing with him.
Yes.
Is the program healthy enough to continue on this kind of, let's say, upward trajectory when Derek King leaves and like so much of that offense is running through him now, whether he's throwing it, running it, doing everything there?
So the way we inadvertently did a decent transition there, because when you talk about sort of programs of yore that were like national title contenders, sort of but now Miami's in that group, right?
Yeah.
Again, the difference with Miami is geography, like we talked about. The problem is that the whole state of Miami thing that you saw in the 30 for 30s, like that will never exist again because 150 programs are in there every day. Every day. You have a Miami recruiter on your staff everywhere. You have a Florida guy on your staff in a college football program, period. And that Florida guy is either a Miami guy or has a Miami guy, okay? Miami never caught up with itself. Miami created its own worst problem. And so the Miami that I'm looking at now in 2020, here's why I'm encouraged. King is a rental, but King is actually showing some proof of concept on offense. And when have we seen that in 15 years?
No, and Red Lashley's doing a hell of a job. And he's done a hell of a job wherever he's been.
So I think Lashley is the bigger story than King, to be honest, because King had shown the potential there and shown his skill set is roughly the same, and I don't think he's necessarily being utilized in a different way. He's just being plugged in. I think he is being utilized in a different way in terms of overall kind of offensive schematic. I think that Lashley's the story there, and I tend to not like to do that where I credit the coaches for everything. Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is it looks as if they're creating consistency in an offensive model that will probably outlive King. And that consistency in anything is not something we've associated with Miami.
Absolutely.
They've made some abysmal hires, just awful hires that don't fit what they need. I think they've finally come around and maybe had a reckoning with themselves and their own booster culture and also their own local fan culture. And like I went down and did a profile on Uncle Luke a couple years ago when I think Golden was still there. And, Miami was really had to take a long look in the mirror. And normally people from Miami love to look at themselves in the mirror, but this was a more sober exercise. I think now, I really do believe a combination of Manny understanding the city, understanding the identity of the place, and honestly better coaching and like a better staff, bar none. I think when we knew they were going to get killed by Clemson, right? Because when you're going like good and just measuring by skill, you're going to lose that game because you literally have no advantage. What we have seen before from Miami was a little bit of hype and, oh, here comes the white smoke and, oh, the U's back. And we all get really excited because we all have nostalgia for that. They get vaporized by a better program and then things fall apart. Okay. Tennessee went through that this year as well. What Miami did that these other schools have not is that they followed it up with good wins. Okay. Virginia is a noisy out. You saw what they did last week with North Carolina. Pittsburgh, they beat Pittsburgh. They came back and won the game that they were supposed to. The teams left on their schedule, look over, especially with the state of UNC, every game is winnable. Every single game. So what would we do?
UNC is so weird this year. Anyways, go on. Yeah.
I completely I ate the curb because I was like, watch out. Coronation week, they're going to stomp Florida State. That's a national power. I totally bought in on North Carolina. But with Miami, What would we do with a one-loss Miami this year? Like we would reframe our context and talk about Miami, I think, in a better way. And so I'm encouraged. I guess I could say I'm encouraged because they've shown consistency, and that's just something like it sounds like that's a backhanded compliment. I swear to God, it's not.
Okay, I got to get through this quickly. I have so much more teams that I'm so curious about that I want your opinion on. Okay, Louisville. Terrible program at the end of Petrino. Like, Lamar Jackson covered up a lot of a lot of just badness at the program. And then Satterfield comes in, they win 8 games. I think it was 8 games. Looking great, that new offense, pistol, outside zone. I love that stuff. And then maybe, I guess my question is, are they closer to the 8-4 team they were last year, or are they closer to, what are they, 1-4 now, 1-5 now, that they are this year? Because the Petrino thing was so bad at the end.
Yeah. Well, first off, everywhere Petrino goes, he always leaves it in ruins. There's always it's like hardcore locker room cancer, not cancel culture, cancer culture. That happens everywhere he goes. The only place where they were able to mitigate that is actually when Jeff Brom took over after 1 year at Western Kentucky, because everyone on that roster knew from day one that was an in-waiting agreement, and that they had to be accountable to Brom and not Petrino. That was never mentioned publicly, but every single person in Bowling Green knew that was the scenario. I think that right now, I think Sat was a good hire. He was an inspired hire. I know Neil Brown really wanted that job. He may have ended up in a better position in West Virginia, at least for the time being. We'll see. I think Sat is good there. Sat may have to overcome the perception of he was at App so long that they had so much consistency. Was he a product of App, or was App a product of him? That's always tough. It's not fair, but it's questions we ask. I don't think it's fair to look at them this year. I do think it's a little bit of the rubber band effect with the personnel, in that when you come in and things are a smoking husk like they are after Petrino, you still have a lot of upperclassmen and some top-end talent. And so the actual pain that you're inheriting has not shown up yet. Because also the other thing about Petrino is when he knows he's headed out, the recruiting completely craters. I'm not a huge Brett Bielema fan, but he did speak very openly about what he was left in terms of an underclassman reserve when he got to Arkansas hurt him more down the stretch than the issues and the relationship problems that he was able to fix in one off season. Okay,
Texas. They get the win last week against it. Because people ask me this all the time. Why isn't Texas, they have the money, they're this, recruiting, blah, blah, blah. And I just I have no answer. I don't know why.
No,
everyone says they don't develop talent. I don't even know what that means. They have good, I don't know. Okay, so we're on the same page about Texas. Yeah. No idea.
It's all cliche, and none of it is actually, it's most of the stuff, even I hear when people are being honest, feels counterintuitive to me. And like I said, I'm not a schematics guy, but it's I hear a lot of they don't develop, or the guys end up soft, and I don't quite know exactly what
I don't like that.
Individual, I've had coaches tell me that they've been unorganized now from Mac Brown to Charlie to Tom. So how in the world is that a coaching thing if it happens at a power program 3 different regimes in a row? I don't know. I can speak at great length about the booster culture there probably being a problem, but I don't understand how it's this much of a problem.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, could it honestly be that they've had just 3 bad runs with coaching regimes? It's not impossible to roll a snake eyes 3 times, right? But I think Texas has to have a reckoning, and I think Texas has to understand. I do believe there's always been an expectation that it's brought to you at Texas, and at this point, why don't you just steal everything Oklahoma does? Why don't you just do every damn thing they do? Because they've shown how to do it, and they are an iteration of you. So I don't understand why everything they're running, you can run because you're pulling kids from the same damn towns, right? If you're going to be on the same kids in the same places in Houston and in Dallas, and going into places like Florida, New Orleans, California, and stuff, just do what they do at this point. I'm kind of flabbergasted.
I wonder if I might be talking on my ass here, but I wonder if the problem with the Big 12 in general, with the, quote unquote lack of defense, is that you get into too many games where even Texas's offense last year was great.
Yeah.
And Sam Elger was great. Now he hasn't played like that this year, but at the same time, like you get into too many games where because no one can play defense, that come down to one possession, that come down to the weird plays that happen. And then it's like, maybe there's a fluky thing happening with Texas. I don't know. I feel like it is because, like you said, there's no reason for them to be not a Big 12, never mind national title contenders, but at least Big 12 contenders. Okay, 3 more. 2 Mississippi schools. Can Michael Leach make it out of this season? I think so. I think they give him a chance, but it's bad right now. And people are leaving. And like, I know a lot of people have looked at, his first year at Texas Tech, and then he rebounds. And the first year at Washington State, people leave the program, then he rebounds. Can you do that? Do you have time to do that in the SEC?
So there are actually 2 very different circumstances, and people, I think don't lump this is advice to anybody. Don't lump those situations in, because Tech was more willing initially to run what he wanted to run, and they weren't as bad a roster as what he inherited at Wazoo. It took more time, but Wazoo was ideal for him coming off of the Craig James thing, because he could hide for 3 years and burn down the roster and do all his politically incorrect stuff and run off kids and bully people. You can't do that anywhere in the Southeast. You cannot. Like, this is a 12-month sport. We pay attention to everyone. So you can make a joke that it's Mississippi State, but it does not matter, because in Mississippi, college football is the only pro sport, and it's year round. People don't understand what I'm saying. Like, recruiting is a season. Okay. Spring is a season. Like, I don't know if he'll be given the leeway if it's a 3-year project. The thing that I'm hung up on, I'm not surprised by any of this, and no one in the industry is. But what I'm surprised on is how is Mississippi State going to position this? Because they fired Joe Moorhead for beating Ole Miss twice and going to 2 bowl games and doing everything within his power to take a particular kind of offense under Dan Mullen and change it to his as fast as he could, with no real quarterback. Like, Nick Fitzpatrick just didn't fit what Moorhead needed to do, and Moorhead was kind of crucified for that. The message Mississippi State sent to Moorhead and to everyone else was, we are no longer content with being good. We have to be great. We have to compete with the standards set by Dan Mullen. Now the message is, we're going to give it an election cycle to see if Mike can come on and we can finally have that team that scores 45 points in the SEC. And maybe we upset Alabama 1 out of every 3 years. And like, if you're looking for the top end performance, like, okay, he took Texas Tech to a Cotton Bowl. And what did he do at Wazoo? Like, you're going to win your division. That template doesn't apply in the SEC West. So it's not going to work out. It was never going to work out.
Good. I'm glad we're on the same page with that.
The question now is not is it going to work out? It's how much longer are they going to let it run? And I would say, barring controversy and scandal, which are very common under him, if you're just looking at the football reasons, I say 3 seasons or 2.75, like an in-season firing in year 3, or he puts his foot in his mouth or tricks, kind of metaphorically trips over his dick thinking that he can bully somebody. Or like, here's my question. Okay, we had COVID, so throw that out. What's he going to be like in January in recruiting? Is he a living room guy? He's in Key West. Like, if he loses out on the wrong Mississippi talent because he wasn't there, they will eat his ass alive.
Yeah. So, okay, but then let's flip it to Ole Miss now. How can they fix – the offense is going to be fine because wherever Lane Kiffin goes, and now with Jeff Lebby, like, that's a great offense. The offense is probably going to be fine. The defense is absolutely one of the worst things I've ever watched in my whole life. People in the same – it's just bad. It's bad. Yeah. What is there – like if Mike Leach is not going to go and recruit Mississippi and lose out on kids, like, can that boost Ole Miss and what they'd like to do on defense?
Well, I think they still have to message out. Like, if you're going and you're chasing a 4-star in defense, you still have to actually deliver the message of what it is you want to do on defense, because you're right. Like, it's so mushy right now for Ole Miss. You can't really tell people we're going to do this. This is our identity. This is what we want to do. And I use those cliches because that's how you sort of embrace the communication with families and with high school coaches. And like, they just don't, what the hell are they doing? Like, it's not a knock against Durkin necessarily, because every DC since probation started has basically had
diminishing returns in terms of talent. When you go on NCAA probation, you have scholarship reductions. There's two things that kill you. Right away, morale kills you and transfers kill you. The two things that actually kill you are about 2 years later, your offensive line and your defensive front seven, they just die. They're just not there. You don't have the depth. You're not able to rotate linemen. You're not able to rotate. You're really, in the South, you lose out on a lot of like fast, big bodies. It's just like as if you didn't recruit for those years. And so that's where you're going to be hurt. And that's where they're hurt right now. And it's going to take, I don't know if you fix it in 1 year. I mean, it's going to take 2 years.
All right. Steve, thank you. Can I call you Steve? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
Steve, thank you so much for being on. This was fantastic. Where can the listeners find you?
Yeah. bannersociety.com at 38 Godfrey on Twitter and Instagram. You might encounter less football and more complaining about like coffee and carpooling and my vehement defense of driving a minivan, which is look, man, it's the best vehicle I've ever owned. I don't care. Like, so it's a lot more of that kind of culture.
Okay. So when I have you back on, we're going to do 45 minutes just on minivan culture.
Look, I'm telling you, it will change your life. You don't even have to have kids. Sliding doors are superior. It's a fact.
Right, but if I don't need like 10 spaces in the back, like I'm good in my Honda Civic.
Then you can put stuff in it, and there's better.
I don't have stuff to put in it. I have a baseball
better gas mileage. I'm telling you, it's better gas mileage than some cars. Like they are miracles. They're little miracles. I just promise.
Okay, thank you, Steven.
I'm 6'5", 220. I easily fit in a minivan. Okay. I feel like I just called into the Dan Patrick Show.
All right. Thanks a lot. All right. So that was it. That was the this week's episode of the PFF College Football Podcast. Again, huge weekend coming up in college football with two like giant games, Clemson and Notre Dame, but also Florida, Georgia. I don't want to jinx anything. I mean, I'm not a Florida fan or a Georgia fan. This feels like. It really feels like this could be the year Florida gets it done, but do not quote me on that. All right, I'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel, and if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.